a parallel version in Matthew chapter 5 through 7, and we covered that about a year and a half ago. But Luke's version is curtailed. It's more concise for the Greek listener, the Greek mind, the Greek reader that would be reading this account. And Jesus addresses what our heart, attitude, and action should be as followers and sons of the Most High. Jesus elaborates as to what our heart, attitude, and action should be toward those who oppose and mistreat us. What our heart, attitude, and action should be for judging others, for judging ourselves truthfully, and consisting of what fruit are we bearing, and considering that, being mindful of that. What are we producing? And finally, he concluded by applying our knowledge to God's word to life is wise. And he encourages the listeners of his teaching, the readers of this text, you and I, his disciples. He encourages us to be not just hearers of the word of God, but actual doers of the word of God. So when he concluded all of his sayings, he entered Capernaum. And a certain centurion's servant, we read, verse 2, who was dear to him, was sick and ready to die. So when he heard about Jesus, he sent elders of the Jews to him, pleading with him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they begged him earnestly, saying that the one for whom he should do this was deserving. For he loves our nation, verse 5, and has built us a synagogue. Here we find a rather unusual and unique situation. In that time, Jews, for the most part, kept their distance from Gentiles. The place called Samaria, they would steer clear of Samaria. They would go around Samaria. Jesus went through it, but they typically would have a route around it because it was consisted of half Assyrians, half Jews. And so they steered clear. They kept their distance from the Gentiles, the Jews did. And those that were Roman soldiers raised the Jews' guard up even more. The Romans had invaded their land, forced their laws and taxes upon them. And here was a Roman centurion who was a ranked officer in the Roman army, submitting to him, asking him, calling him. Now, on our resource page online, I also have daily notes or weekly notes I'll throw up. I give you homework every week, I'll throw those verses up there so you can go and check it. I'll give you helpful resources and links. I have a link up there. Don't look at it now, guys. Wait till later, right? Wait till later. And I have a link that will break down the rank equivalent of Roman centurions to today's military. It's pretty fascinating. It's a historical document, and people it's a historian who gives it. So it's subject to some minor argument here and there. But for the most part, the guy does a fantastic job and gives us a better idea of what a Roman centurion. We've always just had this mindset, century, 100, so they are over 100 men. And that's not necessarily the case. A centurion in the Roman army could command as little as 40 men, all the way up to 1,000 men equivalent, to the range from a second lieutenant to a full-bird colonel today. Okay, so depending on the legion you were from, depending on your experience and that legion, you could be granted authority over a greater number of men, and they were still called centurions, right? So their pay would vary too. It's an interesting study, by the way. And so, whatever the case, these were tough, disciplined, respected men who were trained not to be swayed by the emotions or feelings of those subject to them, the people's subject to them. They just carried out their orders. That's what they did. Not to be caught up in the things that were going on in the communities that they were overseeing. But we're told this centurion was kind of an exception to the rank, exception to the typical centurion that you would read and study about. We're told that he was concerned for his slave. and he was respected by the Jewish elders who came representing him. So, according to Roman law, if your servant or a slave was ill to the point of death or debilitated so he or she could not work, you as the owner, and this is harsh, this is hard, you as the owner could kill them. You owned them, right? It's terrible, but you could kill them so that they would no longer be a burden upon you. Like you would a horse in the old days for a broken leg, right? It's a terrible thing. It was cruel, but it was the law. It was you had that right to do that. But not this guy. This man actually cared for his servant. He was moved by this servant who was sick and about to die. Matthew's account says that he actually came to Jesus, whereas Luke says that he sends people. And you can get caught up in splitting hairs over that or understand that, Matt Gaetz isn't everywhere, but his representatives are, right? So that he was sending, I've seen that. I've been to a lot of, where's Matt Gaetz? He's supposed to be here. Oh, as a representative. Okay, gotcha. So he sent these guys to represent him, right? And Matthew tells us that this debilitation has caused paralyzation to this servant. This man, this centurion, seemed to care for all those that he had authority over. I mean, we're told that he loved Israel. We're told that he built them a synagogue in Capernaum, which also kind of gives why I wanted to get into the ranks. And because an average centurion, we think they didn't make a lot of money, just a soldier of that rank. But some of those centurions made a lot of money because of the higher rank centurion that they were. That's why I wanted to get you into that. Study it and give me some feedback this week if you can. But he was wealthy enough to build a synagogue for the Jews in Capernaum. And this provoked the elders of the Jews to kind of come in his behalf and implore Jesus and say, hey, he's deserving of your attention, please come. As we'll see in the next passage, the centurion didn't even think worthy to come himself. Right? So he sent people. He didn't think that Jesus would want him coming to him as a Gentile. And so then we find in verse 6, Jesus responds, and he says, okay, and he goes with them. We're told that he went with them, and when he was already not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying to him, Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I'm not worthy that you should enter under my roof. Therefore, I did not even think myself worthy to come to you. But just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes. And I say to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it. So maybe the centurion was standing on his terrace, on the rooftop, his balcony, and he can see a crowd coming down the road. When he decides, oh, he's coming, to send this dispatch of friends out to intersect Jesus. This man seems like such a humble man. Maybe, just maybe, this event was an event that opened up a hole in his heart, swallowed up pride, created room for humility. When you think about a man of his stature sending to a Jewish rabbi who's not even recognized as a rabbi by the religious leaders, you think, what would cause him to do such things? Well, I couldn't help but think that life events cause people to have an impoverished spirit, to be poor in spirit. Sometimes the Lord will allow circumstances to rise in our lives. Financial upheaval, job uncertainties, health issues, even the loss of a loved one that bankrupts our self-sufficiency. It brings us to a place where we find ourselves poor in spirit. And then we reach out or reach up in faith and turn our gaze and our attention, our focus on the Lord where it should always be. And then the Lord comes and he meets us in such powerful ways. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes things happen in life that just take your legs out from under you. I mean, there's times where I've got it all figured out. Ooh, watch out. If you haven't had something knock your legs out from under you, you will. When you got your life mapped out, your bank account's good, your health is good, man, you're ready, you're conquering life, and things are just going, and all of a sudden, you remember what you forgot. I forgot about my God. I forgot that I was created in His image to render unto Him what is His, and that's me. And Lord, where have I been? What have I been doing? I wish I could say I didn't do that. I wish I could say I don't ever struggle with that anymore. But I do. And sometimes he rocks my world by allowing certain things in my life to grab hold of me, to grab my attention, not to beat me down, but to lift my head up, right? I don't know, maybe that's what's going on. This man had a real dear relationship with this servant, enough to him to rock him a little bit, to maybe humble himself a little bit, to go and to pursue help from Jesus. But God moves in powerful ways, and He shows up, and He does amazing things when we turn our gaze to Him. And so Jesus, He stops what He's doing, and He makes His way to the Roman officer's house. He stopped right outside, like down the road, not far from the house, we're told, by the Romans' friends who kind of came and conveyed his heart. Hey, he said not to come. He said he's not worthy for you to come into His presence, is essentially what he says here. I couldn't help but remember a passage that we covered not but a month or so back with Peter. When Jesus preaches off the shore of the bank of the Sea of Galilee, and then he pushes off on the boat with Peter and says, hey, take us off, let's go fishing, And Peter's like, oh, we've been fishing all night, there's no fish, I'm a fisherman, you're a carpenter, leave the fishing to me, right? And he says, no, go off the bank and then drop the nets. And so he's like, yes, Lord. And then he goes out, drops. He fills the boat so overflowing, they had to call another boat. It was clearly a miraculous thing. It was not something that happened every day. It was clearly something that rocked Peter's boat. And they get to the shore, and he kind of falls on his face, and he says to Jesus, depart from me, I'm a sinful man. What he's saying is, I'm not worthy to be in your presence. Right? Only here, the centurion takes one more larger step of faith and says, hey, you don't even have to come here. You don't even have to be in my presence. Just say the word. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed. But what the Roman says next, I've always just been moved by. He says, I am under authority, so I understand authority. As mentioned earlier, this man had great authority. Given that he could buy a synagogue, pay for a synagogue, he was a high-ranking centurion. He was well off. He had great authority. And within one of the most powerful nations of the known world did he have this authority. And what he was saying was, hey, I understand authority. I understand authority and sickness, and the sickness within my servant is subject to you and to your authority. Just make the command. I tell those who are subject to me to go, and they go, and come, and they come. Look, it's subject to you. Just make the command. So spiritually, he recognized Jesus' messianic authority and was humbly making his request known. But on a practical note, I found this wisdom to be one of the quintessential principles for healthy leadership to transpire. You see, a lot of people want to lead. A lot of people want to be leaders. They want to lead. They want to have authority, and yet they will not learn to be led. Maybe you've seen that. Unless we learn this principle of submission, we'll never become a good leader. Notice I didn't say you'll never become a leader. All you guys in the military have seen toxic management, right? Happens. You become a leader, but they're not good leaders, right? I've always respected the military, those serving in it, because I feel like my ministering to all the branches around me for the last 15 years has given me exposure to all the different branches in our area, NAS from every branch there. And what I found, I've always been fascinated with is that the leadership capability and qualities of the military when they come in. Whether you're enlisted, whether you're an officer, you come in and you learn leadership. You learn authority. You're under authority, and then you are given authority. Even at early ranks, you are given authority to carry out. And you learn it. It makes you a fantastic leader. You learn your place. You learn how to submit. Sometimes you have to carry out, do things that you don't like, right? That you don't want to do, right? You disagree philosophically, right? You have some wiggle room to protest, but carefully, right? But you carry out your orders. And you move on. And as you lead, you hopefully lead differently than what you've seen poorly leading. But I've seen it in ministry so often. Those who want to become a great leader, they learn to be led. They submit. It's a powerful principle, I think, that we need to learn as Christians. Follow our servant leader. People who have problems being led by men typically have problems being led by God. I'm just saying there's a parallel with this. I've seen it in my years of ministry enough to know. I've seen it in myself enough to know. My stubbornness with men typically is because my stubbornness is with God. Right? So let me alone. I got this. I can figure it out. Right? I can do it better than you. Right? But this man, he knew authority. He knew that this man, Jesus, was something special. He had heard, he had seen sicknesses flee from him. Demon-possessed were healed. He heard these stories, and in here, he knew that if he just spoke the word, it would be done. Well, this moved Jesus. This moved Jesus even more. We're told that in verse 9 that when Jesus heard these things, that he marveled at him and turned around and said to the crowd that followed him, I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. And those who were sent returning to the house found the servant well, who had been sick. Jesus marveled at him. This simple confidence and trust in the ability of Jesus, mere word to be spoken, mere word to heal, showed a faith that was free from superstition. It was free from the reliance of external things. I mean, most of the people in that day, and I'll say in our day, say, yeah, I'll believe, sure, but show me something. We're all from Missouri, right? Is it still the show me state? Someone's got to have shown him something. But show me. And in Jesus' day, they said, you're great. Okay, that's fine, that's great. You speak your words, your authority, great. Dance for us. No, they didn't say dance for us, but they said basically, do a wonder, do a sign, show us. Show us who you are, right? If you really are, show us. Right? But this centurion, he didn't have that. He simply believed and said, I believe. He had great faith, worthy of praise. And Jesus didn't marvel a lot. I mean, he did marvel one time. He marveled in Mark chapter 6, verse 6. He marveled with his own people's unbelief, didn't he? But here he's marveling at their belief. It doesn't even appear that Jesus spoke the word to make this miracle take place. It doesn't say that he spoke the word to heal the servant. But in Matthew chapter 8, verse 13, we're told that Jesus said, hey, go your way. Go your way as you have believed, so let it be done for you. And his servant was healed that same hour. So he didn't even have to speak the word. He just thought it, right? He just thought it. I don't know if he did that, but he just thought it, and the servant was healed. And I couldn't help but think about the men in the house, the servants in the house, the other family member, and I couldn't help but wonder how this man's faith possibly stirred and confirmed the faith of others around him. I mean, you know that there were people kind of wondering, questioning this centurion. You know, they wouldn't dare tell him, but you know, he's like, hey, I know he's dying. We need to get that doctor from Rome. So there's a doctor in Rome. He could, no, there's a man who can heal. You need to go and send, elders, would you go on my behalf? And you know, they're like, okay, boss, you know what I mean? Sure. And you know, the servants, you know, and they're tending to, you know, they were thinking, oh, there's got to be a better means. There's got to be a better medicine than this. You're waiting. He's dying. You're waiting for this man who you don't know, who is a carpenter from Nazareth, a rabbi, to come. Okay, you know, okay. And they're waiting, and they're watching this man's faith. And then what happens? What? That same hour, he's healed? I mean, he gets up and dances a little jig. I always joke about that, but if you have no legs for a while, you'll dance a jig. I mean, and so you know he's excited, you know, and he's up moving around. Man, and what does that do for the people around them? It's contagious, guys, when you and I believe, when we place our trust in Jesus Christ. We don't have to have miracles take place. But you know what? The greatest miracle, God working supernaturally through the natural and everyday circumstances, how we handle situations, how we react to situations, how we trust the Lord in the midst of dire times, says so much. And faith is contagious. You know, you step out in faith, and sure, some are going to mock you. They will. Oh, you're crazy. Why don't you get that doctor from Rome? Oh, wow, you're crazy. You're trusting God for this? Oh, you're crazy. Some are going to mock you, and still others will mimic you. So they will either mock you or mimic you. And who do you think 1,000 years from now are going to praise and thank you? Not the mocker, right? The mimicker that you cause them to stir their faith. People are watching you, and they're watching me. We have our Christian bumper stickers, our Christian radio stations, we have our Christian clubs and our Christian everything. They're watching us. The world is. Oh, and in the South, it's tricky because everyone's a Christian, right? But those who aren't walking with the Lord now, we'll just say, they're watching you. They're watching you, and they're going, how are you dealing with this? How are you dealing with this in your marriage? I had a friend who had a wife that was dealing with major schizophrenia, and she was spinning out all over the place, and she was just a mess. It was the most heartbreaking thing. Broke my heart. And she was doing crazy things, okay? Just crazy, crazy things. And I remember my friend coming for prayer, and he sat down with me, and he said, you know, Randy, I'm getting all this advice, and my friends are telling me I need to leave her. I've got friends that are saying, I need to leave her, that I'm justified to leave her at this point, right? And I remember him saying, you know what? God brought us together. I'm not leaving her. I love her. And he stuck with her. He stuck with her where others would have put her away because she was out there. And God has done some amazing healing in her life and in their marriage. Now they run businesses together. They have grown kids. That was 12 years ago, by the way. And so, you know, I thought there are people who were looking on at this man's faith. And It stirred theirs. Stirred mine. I was the pastor, giving counsel, strong sound, praying for you, brother. And I'd walk off almost weeping, going, oh, man, this is horrible, right? Stirred my faith. Beautiful testimony of the Lord when we step out as this centurion did. He stepped out in faith, and Jesus marveled. We all mess up. Oh, but when we turn to him and say, okay, he picks us up, he picks up the pieces, and he does amazing, powerful work in us. Who knows all the mess ups the centurion had before this? Nevertheless, moving on. Now it happened the day after that he went into a city called Nain. And many of his disciples, they followed him, and a large crowd. And when he came near the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the city was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her. And he said to her, do not weep. So you have this large crowd that went with Jesus. He had 12 disciples that we know, right, in his inner circle. But we'll be told in Luke 10 that he actually sends out 70 disciples. And then there was also this large crowd that's kind of on the outskirts. Yeah, we believe kinda. We're still kind of watching and waiting, and right? And so you have this large crowd, we're told. And what we find happening, and I believe it's no accident, are these two crowds colliding. Okay? One crowd carrying grief, sorrow, hurt, pain, and very little hope. The other crowd is centered on joy, centered on love, healing, and hope. Now, this latter crowd probably didn't fully understand that which they hoped in. The first crowd were reeling in confusion, not knowing how to handle the loss and how to minister to the lost, and it seemed so hopeless. And the latter crowd, although they were centered on hope, they really had no idea exactly what that hope consisted of exactly. Until the cross, but they were surrounded by, they were focused on this crowd, this latter crowd, focused on the one who was the way, the truth, the life, the mender of hurt, the consoler of those who grieve, the bringer of joy and life, and he was there in their midst. And we find these crowds kind of in a crash course collision with such beautiful provision. God visiting his people with great compassion. Jesus sees this procession taking place, this funeral procession. And when the Lord saw her, we're told that he had compassion on her. And he says to her, do not weep. We are specifically told of his compassion, the compassion of Jesus on this occasion, which in the Greek is rooted with sympathy, kind of knowing and understanding. He instantly understood the whole situation, the full ramifications of this dead son. And he had sympathy upon the widow, giving her hope despite the tragedy of the situation. You see, in that day, if you were a widow, they didn't have Social Security or any programs for you like that. They didn't have any assisted living facilities for you. You were to lean on, wholly and solely rely upon your own children to take care of you. Doesn't sound so bad, does it, for some of you? Like, hey, wait a minute, what happened? Well, that's what you would do. This case was particularly grieving as the dead man was her only son. her only provision. Now, I recently officiated a funeral of a really sweet family in our fellowship. A couple attends here. And I approached the grandfather in the family. I expressed my hurt to the man who had lost his bride of 43 years, I think. And I said, I can't even imagine your pain. This must be the worst thing to face. And he quickly responded, thank you. Thank you. He was real gracious. He said, thank you. Yes, but not as bad as burying your child. So a compounded grief is what Jesus faced here. One with both emotional and financial ramifications. And he tells her, do not weep. Jesus genuinely sympathized with her. And we're told then, verse 14, he came and touched the open coffin, and those who carried him stood still. And he said, young man, I say to you, arise. He who was dead sat up and began to speak, and he presented him to his mother. And then fear came upon all, and they glorified God, saying, a great prophet has risen among us, and God has visited his people. If you have frequented third world countries regularly, you've probably seen a funeral procession like this. Has anyone seen a procession like this in a third world country? Anyone? Okay, 1, 2. Okay, there was a couple in the first service too. The crowd walks with the deceased in a casket, and there would be loud crying, carrying on. Typically, they would be paid mourners and grievers. They would pay people to cry out loud and to mourn and make a lot of noise and really kind of grab everyone's attention. I mean, it sounds kind of weird to us, but to them, when you think about it, it kind of helps with the whole closure process, you're recognizing it now, right? Helps in that, right? And so it's a powerful thing, and they would make their way, they would make their way down the street. I've been to Haiti. I've witnessed this in northern Haiti, and them carrying the casket down the street, and it's absolutely a sobering, intense event. I mean, no matter what you're going through, you kind of stop and you watch. It's loud. It's intimidating, really. They're really, I want to say violent, but they're not. They're demonstrative, like how they express themselves and loud, and it's a really intense event to witness, So can you imagine Jesus interrupting this procession as the crowds kind of merge together? His crowd, the oncoming crowd kind of merge, and then Jesus pushing his way into the widow and telling her in a time where she's supposed to be mourning and crying to stop. Please, don't weep. Can you imagine that? And then, to take it a step farther into awkwardness, coming and approaching the dead boy and speaking to the dead boy. I have to emphasize that. He's speaking to a dead boy and says, young man, I say to you, arise. I've done funerals, and people are typically never supposed to be touching the deceased, okay? I've had to stop people. It's weird. Please leave the jewelry alone, ma'am, sir. Please exit. No one knows you here. I mean, I've had all kinds of crazy stories, but maybe there's a child who's hanging on to it, and that happens. But a total stranger from another city walking into your procession, interrupting you, stopping you, telling the widow to stop crying, and then touching the casket with the dead body is, well, more than awkward and weird, right? What a scene. And let me ask you this. Can a dead boy hear? He can if the God of the universe speaks to him. Amen. He can if the one who spoke life into existence, who created language, ears, and the ability to process words, if he speaks to him, he can hear. And he does here. Where we're told in verse 15 that he who was dead sat up and began to speak. Now, I have heard many people share at funerals, but I have never heard the deceased take part. Ever. The tenderness of Jesus, it follows as he then presents the young man to his mom. And I believe he presents him to her for a couple of reasons. First, because the whole thing was probably so surreal. He wanted her, the mama, to process and to take to heart what just took place and to be comforted. You know when someone has a really scary prank and they know it's true, but they're still crying? You know what I mean? It's like, no, it was just a joke. No, you're okay. You know, this would be one of those really heavy things, you know? We're crying for a reason. We're taking him to a grave for a reason. What, is this not, what? You know, so he presents the boy to the mom, and then I think possibly a second reason would be to validate that he was the same boy that she birthed and raised. Hey, this is your child. He's not some zombie. He's not some time traveler. Wait, I've seen too many movies, haven't I? He is your child. This is your child. What a powerful scene if you just put yourself there and wrap yourself around this man of God, this man, God man, in the midst of hurt and pain and disrupting in a beautiful way. And we're told, verse 17, that this report about him went throughout all of Judea and all the surrounding region. I mean, this is certainly not something that you would see or hear about every day. So this report went throughout the region. But if I may, let me add a layer of profound intrigue to this event. We were told in verse 11 that this took place in a city called Nain. This was almost less than a day's journey southeast of Capernaum, 5 or 10 miles southeast of Nazareth. So you kind of get the general vicinity of where this is at, where it took place. There are, in the same areas known in the Old Testament or the First Testament, whichever you prefer, as Endor and Shunem. It's the same area that Jesus is at here in Nain. This is where a woman lost her son. And we're told in 2 Kings chapter 4 that Elisha was called upon, and he came and he found the dead boy, and he raised him from the dead, okay? It is a totally bizarre story for sure, okay? Totally bizarre. Weird stuff that Elisha does here. Check it out this week. It's on the resource page, but it's 2 Corinthians 4, 8 through 37. He raises this boy. Got you interested. You're going to read that one, I know. Not now, later. But this wasn't just a story to these people in Nain. What I'm trying to get at, the point I'm trying to make. This wasn't just a story. This wasn't just this folklore. This wasn't just hey, I heard this story about someone being raised from the dead. This wasn't like that. It was amongst their history. It is documented historically. Okay, so. It's amongst our history, but it was amongst their history in that if someone raised a boy from the dead in Gulf Breeze, they would know it 100 years from now. They would talk about it 500 years from now because it doesn't happen often, right? And then, you would hear it and you would pass it on from one generation to the next generation and so on. So when someone like Jesus comes around and raises a young man from the dead, brings him to life, it resonates and reminds you of God's power, His hope, reminds you of His prophet, in which all the prophets pointed to the one who would rise from amongst them and be their Messiah. So Jesus again causes the people to contemplate who He was. Don't think it was a coincidence He was in Nain that day raising a boy. That's what I'm trying to say. Emmanuel. God with us. and they recognized that God had visited his people. And may we all recognize, each of us, who has visited us. Stand with me. I'm going to ask the praise team to come on up. There is at least 6 occasions in the Gospels that depict Jesus having compassion on those around him. He is a God that is not cold and callous. He is not cold and callous to you and I in our situations, in our places and times of need. He loves us. There is no greater love, and he wants to wade into our lives. He wants to wade into our dilemmas. He wants to wade into our problems. He wants to wade into our hopeless situations. And just as God visited his people in this passage, the Lord Jesus visited mankind so that he could go to the cross and die for our sins.